Hey, it's Yakov, and you're watching the SwiftBird. Imagine you have an app where users can trade stock, or cryptocurrencies, or real currencies, or they can make money transfers, or anything like that. And at some point you notice that the users get more stuff than they paid for, by just a fraction more. It doesn't seem like a big deal, the users don't even notice. But then you realize you have hundreds of thousands of them. No, millions. No, tens of millions. At that point, the situation becomes pretty drastic. You start the investigation, you dig deeper, that's what we do on this channel, until you finally find the bug's cause. Apparently, every time the app calculated the amounts, it made a very small error. Maybe it was wrong by only a 10,000. Again, not a big deal. But with many users and many transactions, your losses grew and accumulated until they burned a hole in your company's budget. So, what happened? Turns out, the weird calculations are the result of you using the double type in the app. Not cool, right? Well, what can you do about it? Is there a better alternative to double? Turns out, there is. In today's video, I'll explore the decimal type in Swift, how it's different from the other numeric types such as double or float, and when it's appropriate to use each of them. Subscribe to the SwiftBird if you care about software quality and aren't afraid to dig deeper. And by the way, if you're just starting your journey in software development, I recently launched a series called Intro to iOS App Development. Check out the playlist featured somewhere here on the screen. If you find this video helpful, please give it a like and consider sponsoring me and this channel at the links below. Your support really helps me maintain the SwiftBird. Now back to the video. As you probably know, computers operate with data in the binary format, which means everything is represented as ones and zeros. That includes decimal numbers you and I are familiar with. While there's no rocket science in using base 2 numbers instead of base 10, it's more time-consuming for modern humans. By the way, this wasn't always the case. Many ancient civilizations used non-decimal numeral systems, and we can find traces of some of them even today. For example, the clock has 12 hours and not 10, 60 minutes and not 100, and so on. All of that is for a reason, and I won't even go into discussing feet and inches. While the arrangement where the data is stored in the binary format but entered and displayed in the decimal is pretty efficient, sometimes it can result in imprecisions, especially when it comes to numbers with a fractional part, also known as floating point numbers. That happens because not every decimal number can be represented in the binary system exactly. Swift used to suffer from some of those quirks in its early versions, but over time it's learned to autocorrect most of those mistakes. However, you can still see errors even in pretty simple cases. Try for example to calculate a sum of 1.1 and 2.2. Even in the latest Swift version 5.8 you won't get exactly 3.3 as the answer. In most situations, the error is pretty negligible. I mean, who cares about the 16th figure after the period? But there are some cases where getting everything exactly right is critical. Imagine for instance that you're building an app where users can trade stock or cryptocurrencies, or calculate their taxes. If you allow even the smallest error in these cases, it can result in noticeable losses. So, what does Swift's decimal have to do with it? As you probably know, Swift has more than one type for working with numbers, and each of them is suitable for a specific situation. For instance, you have int and uint for integers, float and double for floating point numbers, and so on. But chances are you've never worked with decimal. Maybe you haven't even seen it. That's not really surprising given decimal's characteristics. First of all, it's not part of Swift, but rather it comes from the foundation framework, which means you should be pretty intentional about using it. Besides that, decimal is harder to work with. It's not as flexible as, let's say, double, and many implicit conversions you're used to simply don't work, so you have to initialize decimal explicitly. One more downside of using decimal is its speed. My very simple test has shown that arithmetic operations with decimals are about 12 times slower than the same operations with doubles. It's still microseconds, nothing to worry about, and you likely won't ever witness a situation where this difference is tangible. However, decimal has more precision than double does. With double, your number's resolution is limited to 15 figures, while decimal can hold up to 38. In both cases, the limit refers to the number's mantissa, also called significant with a D. You can view it as a group of consecutive digits which constitute the number significant digits. The mantissa can be offset by having it multiplied by the base raised to some power. In the case of decimal, the power can range from negative 128 to positive 127. You can have a very large number with no fractional part, or a very small one with 0 as the integer. But the important thing is, the digits in the mantissa must be contiguous, in other words, grouped together. Everything that doesn't fit the resolution limit is lost. But the main upside of using decimal becomes apparent when you need precision while working with base 10 numbers, which is especially relevant for financial data. The decimal type was designed from the ground up to be used in such cases. Double and float are binary on the inside. Decimal is not. Its internal outline makes it not susceptible to the errors which occur when you convert binary numbers to the decimal representation, and vice versa. One more reason in favor of using decimals is when you need to read base 10 numbers from a file or network response. In that case, decimal will parse the input literally and initialize a decimal instance without any conversions in the process. Double, in contrast, will parse the number as decimal, convert it to the binary format for storage, and then, when you want to show it on the screen or print to the console, convert it back to decimal. You may not even think about these conversions, but they're the reason why you might get some funny results. Let's talk about how decimal works under the hood and what makes it different. Unlike Swift's double or float, decimal is not a floating point type, even though it has a similar semantics. Internally, decimal consists of two components, the mantissa and exponent. The mantissa is stored as a sequence of 8 integer numbers, each represented by uint16. With each 16-bit number able to take one of over 65,000 values, a group of 8 such numbers supports this many values. As you can see, this figure is 38 digits long. That is why decimal's resolution is limited to 38 contiguous digits. Besides that, decimal is characterized by an exponent of the base 10. The exponent is stored as a single int8 number, which gives you the range of a normal signed 8-bit integer, from negative 128 to positive 127. Floating point numbers such as float or double are also defined as a combination of some mantissa and exponent, plus they have a separate property for the sign. But unlike decimals, floating point's mantissa is not an integer. It's another floating point number, and this time it's binary. This representation is directly responsible for floating points imprecisions. I should mention that the actual declaration of decimal is not open source, just as the entire Foundation framework. In my research, I was browsing the Swift Core Libs Foundation repo. It is Apple's official open source port of Foundation, created for use on the platforms where the Objective-C runtime is not available, for example Linux or Windows. You'll find the link to the file where decimal is declared in the description. Though decimal seems like a good solution when you need high precision, in many cases it's not really necessary. In software development, each task can usually be solved with more than one tool, and I believe it's the engineer's job to choose the most appropriate one. When you work with real-world currencies, you rarely deal with fractional units smaller than 1/100th of the basic one. For instance, $1 equals 100 cents, £1 equals 100 pennies, and so on. I found a handful of currencies which divide their basic unit by 1,000, and you may want to take that into account. But apart from 2 countries which recognize Bitcoin as a legal tender, it's safe to assume that you won't need to split any currency unit into parts smaller than 1,000th. That observation makes the practical task of handling currency pretty easy to solve. Instead of using the decimal type, you can simply store the amounts as integer numbers of fractional parts. For example, $11.57 can be stored as 1157 cents internally, and formatted only at display time. In that case, you can simply use int as the data type and not worry about precision. But for less common scenarios, decimal still looks like a solution. Here comes a short recap. Swift's double or float are binary at the heart. They are really efficient, but not always precise when it comes to decimal arithmetic. The decimal type, in contrast, maintains precision of base 10 operations, but that benefit comes at a cost of lower speed and user-friendliness. You can use decimal for working with financial data, where conversions or rounding errors are not acceptable. It's also a good tool for parsing base 10 numbers from strings. But in many cases, like displaying prices, you can get by with a simpler solution, such as storing amounts in cents instead of dollars. Decimal is just another tool in the large collection you have as an engineer. It has its own benefits and limitations, and in my opinion, knowing each tool's constraints and choosing the most appropriate solution is what distinguishes a seasoned engineer from a beginner. That's it for today's video. If you found it helpful, please give it a like. And if a like is not enough, you can sponsor the channel at the links below. Subscribe to the SwiftBird and make your apps fly. I'll see you next week, and until then, have a great time.